Good morning. Good morning and welcome to the latest in our webinar series, Current Briefings. Today we're going to be discussing energy revenue opportunities for the UK businesses post-Triads. And I'm joined today by Barry Hurst, Head of Business Development, and Mike Garland, Head of Flexible Energy Solutions at NLX. In 2 seconds, I'm going to hand over to Barry for a quick presentation before we move on to the Q&A portion of the session. But just before that, I'd like to highlight that if you have any questions for Mike or Barry, either during the presentation or during the Q&A, just stick them in the questions box at the bottom right-hand corner, and I'll do our best to get to as many as possible. So without further ado, Barry, would you like to kick us off with the presentation?
Absolutely, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. If we could start at the beginning of the presentation rather than the end, Molly, that would be great. Thank you very much.
Apologies.
I thought you were giving me a prompt there to finish slightly more quickly.
Not at all.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining. So, revenue opportunities for UK businesses post-Triads. Triads have been with us now for 32 years. I think National Grid's records go back to 1990. And this is the last season that they'll be in existence, let's say. It always amazes me, even now, when I speak to clients, that some of them aren't aware of Triads, and some of them even refuse to believe that there is an actual transmission charge embedded in their bills if it's not made visible. So just for those who don't know on the call, and I'm not expecting that to be a big number of people, what is a Triad? It actually refers to the 3 half-hour settlement periods with the highest system demand between November and February, and they have to be separated by at least 10 days. And National Grid uses that triad to determine the transmission charges and gain their revenues, and they use the half-hour metering to do that. So previously, and up to the end of next February, clients can avoid costs by trying to anticipate when those 3 highest settlement periods are, reduce their demand on switch-on generation, and therefore avoid costs or an element of their bills. So that ends in February, March 1st next year. So what can customers do, particularly in a dynamic energy landscape? We all appreciate that there is significant price volatility, grid instability. We've all read in the news and BBC how there could be blackouts this year, and we all know that there are more constraints on the grid as there is increased complexity, flexibility of supply, and flexibility of demand. So what can clients do now that this cost avoidance opportunity is being removed to try and either stabilize or increase revenues? There are a number of different options available. And I think the best way to try and demonstrate those is to run through a couple of scenarios. So, scenario A. Let's take a business based in the UK that has a single manufacturing site that imports about 4 megawatts and has a combined heat and power plant to CHP. 7 megawatt in size with a 5 megawatt load, so giving them 2 megawatts headroom. And they dissipate the heat for Triads. And in trying to anticipate those 3 highest half-hour settlement periods, they run for about 30 hours between November and February. And let's imagine they hit all 3 triad periods, the half-hour periods. That would give them a cost avoidance or a saving of about £120,000. There would be a cost for that additional running gas, so a net saving on their bill of about £102,000. Once Triads have gone away, how do you replace that cost avoidance? Well, there are a couple of immediate schemes that come to mind. One is the new demand frequency scheme that's currently running through a pilot phase. There was a test earlier this week. The scheme dictates that there will be 12 one-hour test periods. We've already had 2 of those. So for clients that would want to join that moving forward, there will be 10 one-hour test periods remaining. And there's a payment of £3,000 per megawatt hour that the grid is committed to. There would again be additional gas cost, but that would give you a gross income or earnings of 54,000 just over. And that would be for the 10 hours operation that is stipulated. So that's one option, but that's a pilot scheme. You get paid for participation. So what would another option be? There's also the capacity market. So here you get paid for availability, and you would be entered into the scheme. You can either apply yourself or use an aggregator such as NLX. Looking at the pricing 4 years ahead, participation in that would give you a gross income per annum of 134,000. And we estimate that would require 4 to 6 hours of operation. So that's one scenario. What if you have more than one site, but maybe smaller sites? So in scenario B, we have a client who has 10 sites across Great Britain, mixed use commercial buildings, average loads of between 1 megawatt and 4 megawatt. They're able to curtail across the site, so reduce their demand. And again, they're trying to hit the triad periods. Typically, they forecast and respond about 20 times over between November and the 1st of March, and are able to reduce by 4 megawatts. So that would give them triad savings of about 183,000. Comparing that to the demand frequency scheme and capacity market, yes, the savings are higher, but there's no consistency or certainty around those savings. It really is trying to forecast and hit the periods. Whereas certainly with the capacity market, you're able to look out 4 years ahead. There's far less participation in terms of hours, far less potential disruption to your core processes. So an easier system to participate in, one could argue. Now, we are in the unusual situation that for the next 12 months, a business in theory could participate in all 3 schemes. So you could be trying to forecast those triad periods for 22-23. You can still sign up for the demand frequency scheme that's running currently and take advantage of those revenues. And you can also sign up to the capacity market entering in October next year to take advantage of that revenue stream. So this 22-23 period is really very much a one-off in terms of trying to maximize cost avoidance and revenues. But certainly moving forward, DFS is a pilot scheme, has potential, but it remains to be seen how that's going to be run moving forward after this pilot phase. Capacity market, much more long-standing, requires less participation from a client, certainly looking at historical information, and gives you certainty around the revenue streams. We have pricing information certainly for the next 4 years, so there's a lot of certainty there. So there's a few scenarios. Once clients have entered into the capacity market or DFS, and you start to trust and have certainty around how that works, operations and process can either switch on or reduce curtailment. There are many, many other options open in terms of ancillary services, customer benefits, and energy markets that clients can participate in to boost those revenues. But it really is about understanding those markets in detail. Some of them are complex and they all have different requirements. It's about understanding and being in the right market at the right time. And that's really where an aggregator can support you in understanding all those markets, getting you to into all those markets in terms of application, approval, and participation, and then flexing those schemes to make sure that we can maximize your revenues whilst ensuring you're not having any detrimental effect on your core process and activities. So why would you choose NLX? We're a global expert in flexibility and energy services. We're the largest provider of demand response in the world. We have 8 gigawatts under management globally. So when it comes to understanding those markets, all the mechanisms that are available, regardless of geography, NLX is in an excellent position to advise clients, first of all, on which assets they can participate with, and how to minimize interruption in the process, and to really be in the right market and the right time to maximize those revenue streams. Okay, I think that's just about 10 minutes, Molly. I hope everybody understood that, and looking forward to getting some challenging questions.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you very much, Barry. Yeah, if anyone has any additional questions, do feel free to stick them in the box. I know we've got a couple in already. So I think to start off with, we have one from Simon Mitchell who's saying, can you participate in both DFS and the CM?
Should I take it, Barry? Give you a break.
Yeah. Thank you.
So, as Barry was sort of alluding to earlier, if you are not currently participating in things like the capacity market, you could go into DFS now and then enter capacity market later in the year. If you're already in capacity market or balancing mechanism and other services, no, you cannot also participate in DFS.
And another question from Michael Watts is, he says he doesn't think that they are able to use standby gen for DFS as it's defined as a balancing service. Do you have any more information on that?
I think there's still some open questions about on-site generation and the eligibility, particularly with environmental permits there. So it's definitely a case-by-case basis.
Next question from Conjowick. What is the minimum power that you would need to work with NLX? Does it start from 1 megawatt, or is it less, or is less also possible?
Yeah, so typically our clients, yes, are above a megawatt in size, but in our portfolio we do have customers that have individual sites that are less than a megawatt, but the sites aggregated together definitely over a megawatt. So that's sort of the area of the market we're active in. So I would say yes, over a megawatt.
Fantastic. And the next question, Ray RL says, are you also exploring DNO local flexibility services as part of the portfolio of services that you target?
Do you want me to keep going, Barry?
Yeah, go on. That's an interesting one.
Yeah, is definitely a service we follow and look at, but it is hugely locational dependent. So the customer has to be in the vicinity of where the requirement from the DSO is. So we absolutely follow the auctions and look for opportunity for our clients. But the amount of participation, I would say, is pretty low in those services. And we see more opportunity in other services before you get to that.
Do you think that could change in coming years? It does seem like there's more and more locational flexibility services being launched.
Yeah, it could change, but again, your client needs to be in the area, and that needs to be happening in the right place.
And the next question is from Mosen Madibi. What are the challenges of NLX?
Oh gosh, yeah. Let's take that as is. What do we see as the challenges in terms of the flexibility of market and mechanisms?
Yeah,
I'm assuming that's what you mean. And please type in if you'd like to be more specific. I think for us, the challenges are really around what's happening in the marketplace, or trying to support clients in understanding how they can maximize their assets. As I said at the beginning of the presentation, what we see is increasing flexibility in supply. As we see more renewables, solar, wind, etc., and also balancing that with increased flexibility in demand. If you just look at the forecast from now to 2050, we're looking at a doubling of electrical demand from about 300 terawatt hours to over 600 terawatt hours. So, and the largest part of that is going to come from road surface transport, so EVs, and that causes an enormous amount of flexibility in the market. So for us, it's really understanding what mechanisms are going to come out to support that, and then providing our clients with the right services. So again, they can be in the right market at the right time to maximize their revenues. That's the biggest challenge we see. I don't know whether you'd add to that, Mike?
No, that's fine.
The next question is from Sean Cleary. How does ESO plan to allow aggregation by GSP group only? Sorry, 2 seconds. How does the ESO plan to allow aggregation by GSP group only impact on revenue opportunities for businesses?
I personally don't follow the question.
I don't.
No.
No problem. We can skip over that one. Alistair Dunn has said, are generators metering requirements less onerous to participate in DFS in comparison with the capacity market?
Generally, yes, is the answer.
Okay. Nice short answer.
Yeah,
Joe's asked.
Sorry, I'll just add to that in terms of what, again, part of our area of expertise. So if a client has any concerns, you know, they could speak to us and we can assess what metering they have, whether it's compliant, and then we can support in putting additional metering in if required.
That makes sense. So a question from Joe. With Octopus delivering 110 megawatts of demand reduction from customers in the DFS scheme last week, do you foresee flexibility revenues coming down in the future when C&I flexibility is effectively competing against residential flexibility?
Sure. I would firstly say we shouldn't see them as competing. You know, both are providing valuable service. They're providing it from different asset bases, which adds diversity in the energy system, and there shouldn't ever be, you know, one source of generation or solution in the market. So it's a good thing. I think, as with the DFS is an auction, it's a pay as bid auction. And with all auctions, fundamentally, it's a question of supply and demand. So, yeah, when there is more supply than the requirement, that is going to have downward pressure on pricing, undoubtedly. But this is like something that we've seen many times in energy markets, in ancillary services, in all markets. But I would say that as the energy market evolves, you know, we see National Grid and changing its products, that creates opportunity, and the game is to follow that opportunity and be, as Barry said earlier, be in the right market at the right time.
Fab. David Jameson has asked, what is the typical engagement process? What does the client need to do and or provide from the onset?
I can take this one. So yeah, initially I think it's show a willingness to participate in the markets, number one. Then it's really an understanding of how they're looking to participate. So are they looking to curtail their load? So switch off certain items or turn down. I think that's another common misunderstanding that clients think I need to stop operations to participate. That's not so. Very often what we find is that we can turn down clients' processes or certain assets in terms of our handling systems, etc., to aggregate up a load. Obviously, so we need to understand that. Very often it's just a case of analysing the half-hourly data as a start to understand, okay, what is the total load, what's baseline? If they're looking at participating with generation assets, then obviously we need to understand the size of those, condition, etc. So initially it's a data exchange. Then very often it's a site meeting and maybe a walk around the site if we're looking at curtailment. Again, very often, numerous times we go to a site and a client will say, well, I've got an asset, but I can't switch anything off. Once our experts have gone around the site, it's surprising what we can uncover. You know, just last week we were on a site, no, we can't switch anything off. By the time we'd walk around, they had over 1 megawatt that they could actually turn down and participate with. So it's doing that initial assessment, and then from there, it's a case of analysing the data, producing a proposal for the client, which will illustrate how much, you know, revenue they can create, and then contract and also metering, if metering is required, particularly from asset generation perspective. To the earlier question, we can say, okay, this is the metering, and we can support in terms of identifying the costs, even putting that in, and then maybe looking at offsetting that against revenues if it's a capex issue for the client.
Do you think there's a lack of awareness from lots of the clients that you do start to talk to about just how much capacity that they do have and the opportunities out there for them?
I think that there's a massive variety of maturity levels in the market. You know, there were some people on the call that have probably been participating in Triads since 1990, you know, 32 years into it, and are very mature and knowledgeable. contrary to that, as I said earlier, there are still clients I go and see who will point blank refuse to believe that they pay transmission charges. It doesn't show up in the bill because of the way they're billed. So for sure, in instances like that and the sort of upper end of the scale, there are opportunities being missed.
Absolutely. Another question from Joe. Does DFS participation automatically qualify you for capacity market participation? Do the requirements differ, and who decides?
Should I take it, Barry? There is participating in DFS does not qualify you for participating in capacity market. They are separate schemes. You have to go through separate registration processes, and the requirements differ in terms of who decides. It's not that there's one person just deciding this. There is a set process for each of these, and you follow that process. And that is what we as NLX take clients through, take responsibility for if you use us.
I wonder if you could talk through a bit more about what the set requirements for participating in DFS are and what the requirements are for participating in CM.
Sure. For DFS, the requirement is, I guess the biggest requirement is that you can reduce your demand for a minimum period of 30 minutes. There is then requirements in terms of the size of a unit. So the minimum is a megawatt, but that doesn't mean that an individual site needs to be a megawatt for DFS. So we were talking a moment ago about Octopus. They are aggregating customer load, so they're probably down to a few tens of kilowatts aggregated up. So it's more a requirement for bidding in. And then for DFS, other requirements are that participating in these test events, so 4 test events in your first month, and then subsequent tests. That is pretty much the main requirements. There is then, of course, proving performance, but this is done post-event. There is no penalties in DFS of any type. If we go to capacity market, I would say the requirements are more onerous than DFS. Linking to the last question, there are penalties within the capacity market, penalties for not meeting your obligation or then delivering in the year. So that really puts the emphasis on completing your tests throughout the year. So we call them satisfactory performance days. That would probably be the biggest thing from the capacity market in terms of size. We talk, for us, it's really, we look for customers above a megawatt in that program.
That leads in nicely to David Jameson's asked a question about what is the commercial arrangement with the client and NLX, e.g. share of revenue. So when you have that 1 megawatt, what's the commercial agreement?
I mean, there are various ways it can be done depending on the client requirements. I'd say largely it's normally a split on the revenues. We agree with the client. They take the larger percentage of the savings, and we take a smaller percentage, basically to cover the application process, running the actual events, notifications, etc. So it's an administrative charge in terms of a minority percentage of the revenues created. I think one point that we've not covered is that there are penalties potentially with the capacity market. And NLX largely do shield clients from those penalties and the risks involved. So again, that's the reason for the percentage split, because we are shielding clients. If they went into those markets on their own and then didn't participate or make themselves available, and they can be liable to significant penalties. As we're an aggregator, we can shield clients from the majority of those penalties.
The next question that we have in from Giles is, how volatile is the CM DFS market with the sharply increasing TNUOS costs coming in April? Is it reasonable to think that participating in CM DFS could consistently offset these costs?
So I'll answer that. The capacity market, to start with, is, yes, extremely volatile. Since its inception, you've seen prices from about 70 pence up to £75. So there is volatility. What we can offer, though, to customers is we have position for the next 4 years. So we can give you security and pricing for the next 4 years. And that pricing, what Barry was trying to show on the previous slide, is around the £16–17 across those 4 years as an average price. So yeah, there is volatility. We try and remove that for our customers.
Yeah, and I think to the last point, could it consistently offset the costs? I think the scenario showed there's a large part of variability in that. I think what DFS and certainly capacity market do is give clients certainty looking ahead as to how much of those costs they can offset. Whereas, Triads was very much a lottery. Can you hit any of the events or all three? There was a lot of uncertainty around that.
It does seem with the increased volatility, obviously core to what you guys do is making sure that you're in the right market at the right time. Is that more challenging this year than it has been in previous years because there's so much market volatility?
I don't think it's more challenging. We have market experts and analysts. We are constantly monitoring, pricing positions, etc. We work with clients very closely to understand what assets they have available, how they use them, and how critical they are to the core process. So, it's a case of balancing and making sure the core process isn't affected. And then with that remainder, monitoring markets, understanding the mechanisms of all those markets, and bidding them in or out, or flexing those market participations to make sure they maximize the revenue. It doesn't get more challenging. It's just a case of monitoring the data and acting accordingly.
And I'll just add on, although we see in energy markets there's been volatility this year, in certain other markets, some of the ancillary markets, there isn't the volatility that I guess perhaps you see as the headline in the energy market.
And with looking at these new markets coming in, with looking at DFS, is there any concern for you or for your clients about the revenue that they can make from it? I know when they were running the pilots in terms of the domestic side of things earlier this year and aggregating individual households, there was some concern that households just wouldn't make enough for there to be an incentive. Is that something that you're seeing working with your clients?
I think it's a difficult one to address. I mean, we, as I said before, we're the largest aggregator globally, and we look at prices that are paid in certain markets or certain geographies. If you just look at the Irish and the UK market, there are massive differences in terms of the potential payments per megawatt. Sort of 7-8 times as much in the UK as opposed to the island for certain schemes. So I think it's up to the provider of these mechanisms to decide what price to set and whether that's attractive or not. But the customer, and certainly if you look at DFS and domestic residential customers, we look at the event that was held just earlier this week, and householders were potentially being paid 97 pence for participation. Is that attractive? It's something that needs to be looked at to make sure that they get the participation that's required.
Absolutely. And it looks like there'll be lots of lessons to be learned over the next few tests over the winter. Sadly, I think that's all we have time for today. Thank you very much for a really interesting presentation, Barry, and thank you both, Barry and Mike, for the conversation following. This is the last current briefings for the year, but I'm going to be joined by NLX for another session in January, so keep an eye out for that. But beyond that, thank you everyone who's joined. Thank you, Barry and Mike, again, and I hope everyone has a lovely day. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Cheers, thanks.
Bye.